Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us as we get ready to talk you in to this D-back broadcast. The Diamondbacks, after struggling over the weekend against the Chicago Cubs, now not going to get much easier as Arizona has to take on the Cincinnati Reds. Just got done with a hard-fought series against the St. Louis Cardinals. The Diamondbacks, having struggled so mightily against the last-place Cubs or near last-place Cubs, now are going to take on a team who has been at, around, or in first place throughout much of the season with the Cincinnati Reds. So the Diamondbacks have a tough road to hoe here, and we're going to get you ready for that one. But first, going to talk about some stuff that I was hoping that we were going to be able to avoid largely, and that is everything that's been happening in Penn State. Thought we might start touching on it when we get a little bit closer to the football season, because this is, of course, a giant football story, but it has become what a lot of people are talking about as one of the biggest controversies or sordid affairs that the sports world has ever seen. Just to give you some quick background, it became we all became aware in November when Jerry Sandusky, a former defensive coordinator at Penn State, was charged with a series of incredibly ugly and violent child molestations. The NCAA almost immediately said that whatever happened, it was going to become involved with the process. Sandusky recently had his hearing completed. He was found guilty on 45 counts of sexual assault with minors. He is going to face at least 60 years in prison after the conviction. And meanwhile, while all that was going on, that investigation was going on, Penn State had hired a former FBI agent to conduct its own investigation. And we had found out since then that Joe Paterno, who had largely been looked upon as being the saintly figure, he has always been heralded for doing things right, especially recruiting and winning football games. Well, apparently he didn't necessarily deserve a lot of that, because it has been discovered through this investigation that Penn State has been conducting that Joe Paterno, the former president of the school, the vice president of the school, the athletic director, all of them knew that Jerry Sandusky was preying upon children and abusing them sexually while using the football facilities to help him accomplish these twisted goals that he had been pursuing. And that Joe Paterno, as early as 1998, definitely knew about it and had not done anything to try to stop it. In fact, he was getting in the way of the investigation. He and the three other people mentioned, the president, vice president, and athletic director, were knowingly lying about it. They were perjuring themselves after they had been questioned about it in 2001. And that Joe Paterno now the conversation has been, how is this going to impact his legacy? Now, of course, he is going to be clearly remembered as the person who is essentially aiding and abetting a sexual predator. But the other issue is that some people are starting to broach is, what is the NCAA going to do about Penn State? It came out in November, as previously mentioned, that they were going to come out there and they were going to do something. The NCAA was going to have a say in what was going to happen with Penn State. It wasn't just going to be the Justice Department that was going to inflict any sort of damage or force into penance as this thing was going to play out. The NCAA was going to have a hand in it. And that people are now saying that as the NCAA has taken it upon itself to be involved in it, that what needs to happen is the death penalty. That they need to have that fatal blow that has only happened to Southern Methodist University in the football world, that Penn State needs to so suffer because it has allowed so many different children to suffer. Now, as soon as we start talking about this, and especially we here on the West Coast, the conversation naturally gravitates all the way back to Southern California, because USC had recently had sanctions administered to it that were up to, they say that the next step was going to be the death penalty. All right. And the reason why is because the NCAA said that as a repeat offender, USC had been pursuing and acquiring illegal advantages, especially in the world of recruiting. My argument is going to be Penn State needs to be treated with the same gloves as was USC, because by lying and perjuring and allowing Jerry Sandusky to continue to prey upon children, Joe Paterno, while is not trying to necessarily obtain an illegal advantage, he was trying to maintain his recruiting advantage, knowing that if this got out, if Jerry Sandusky was outed as being this pedophile maniac, that he was going to be associated with this directly as long as he was coaching at Penn State. Or he was going to go from the guy who was always winning and recruiting the right way to the guy who was associating with sociopathic child molesters. And he didn't want to do that. That is why he lied, and that is why the NCAA is right to become involved in this, because he had essentially been sweeping this under the rug for the same reason that people argue USC was doing this, to try to get the most elite recruits in. But to have the best conversation about this, I think we need to go back and talk about exactly everything that had been happening with USC and also a couple of the other revelations that we've had from different schools all over the country. So as a quick review, a lot of people have this misunderstood that USC got punished because USC is a bunch of cheaters and that Reggie Bush was being paid and that USC pays players and they had coaches that knew everything that was going on and on and on and on. Very oversimplified. Because what had been decided that USC's transgressions were was first that Reggie Bush's parents, not Reggie Bush, Reggie Bush's parents were living in a house in San Diego County at reduced rent. They were still paying for the house. It was just they were living in it a little bit cheaper. And in fact, USC's athletic department and coaching staff said, how are we supposed to make sure all of our parents, not our players, how are we supposed to make sure our parents' players are doing the right thing when they're living 75 miles away? The NCAA said that high-profile recruits require high-profile monitoring. I'm paraphrasing, but it's something along those lines. If you're going to go out there and you're going to get the Reggie Bushes, then you're going to have to make sure that Reggie Bush and his family are doing everything that they're supposed to. Strike one. Also said Reggie Bush was given a car. Reggie Bush was driving a 1996 Chevy Impala. It was a joke. The thing was a hoopty. Okay? So not a lot you can really pin on Reggie Bush. They could not determine whether or not Reggie Bush was actually being paid. Nobody ever found anything like that out. The other reason that they said that USC deserved all these sanctions and such a stiff penalty was because assistant coach and one of the recruiting coordinators, Todd McNair, was in cahoots with different agents, including one that was trying to cozy up to Reggie Bush, to try to direct blue-chip recruits over to USC. The evidence they had for that was 2 phone calls that McNair had made to a phone number that he had thought was going to one of his recruits. It, in fact, went to an agent. The first time he called, he hung up because he thought that this was not his recruit. Second time, he left a message. Or on the phone records, it showed 2 minutes, essentially long enough to realize that he had the wrong number and then went ahead and left a message no matter what. The NCAA said that was enough to essentially give a modern-day program the death penalty. Now, McNair is suing the NCAA for all sorts of things, including illegal termination, slander, and libel. And where it is in a civil suit, he's got a pretty good case. That's going to be coming out in the coming year. So we'll know exactly how great a leg that the NCAA had to stand on. But then we have some other things coming out that seemed as if they were going to have as good or if not greater case against these institutions as the NCAA did against USC. First was Ohio State, where you have a bunch of big names doing things that make perfect sense in a normal world, but not in the NCAA, selling their jerseys and selling their different bowl paraphernalia and stuff like that for money, which is illegal according to the NCAA because it provides them with an unfair advantage over smaller programs that don't necessarily have the prestige where you can go in and promise a recruit, hey, come play for Ohio State because we got all sorts of bums doing tattoos and making, giving you the opportunity to make a bunch of money. Now, the difference is, whereas USC insists that it did not know and could not know what Reggie Bush's parents were doing in San Diego from Los Angeles, Jim Tressel at Ohio State admitted to knowing exactly what was going on. In fact, the monetary benefits that Reggie Bush and his family received was roughly the same as had the Ohio State players with all of their much smaller transactions. So when you take all this into account, you're thinking that Ohio State was going to get the USC treatment, 2-year bowl ban, 3-year recruiting restrictions with a loss of 30 scholarships, or roughly 10 per year, right? That seems like it was going to make perfect sense, if only because the coach admitted to knowing this stuff, A, and B, this is roughly the same amount of money that changed hands. Ohio State was treated with the kid gloves, and everybody kind of dismissed that as, well, the NCAA realized it was too hard on USC. Bull pie. If this is how it's going to be on one program, it's got to be like that with all the other ones. And then we find out last football season that over at Miami, which has a long history with run-ins with the NCAA, that there's allegations that they were actually going out and paying players directly and doing such things as purchasing time with prostitutes for them. All right. Now we got the S word involved, sex. Okay? And it's just getting all the more intriguing. And now what's going to happen with Miami if we're going to see this lesser punishment being directed down to Ohio State? And down to try to tie this into the whole Penn State fiasco. All right. What we are to believe now from the NCAA is that it is, for whatever reason, and I think it's probably because that Ohio State was doing much more to cooperate with the NCAA's investigation, as was USC. So because of the cooperative air about the whole situation, USC was hit so much harder than was Ohio State. The message to all the other programs, you better help us out or we're going to come down on you hard. Otherwise, the NCAA is saying that it is worse for parents to live in a house at reduced rent 75 miles away from campus than it is for players to take their jerseys and their helmets and their bowl rings and sell them to tattoo artists. All right, it is worse because USC got the worst penalty. All eyes are right now on the NCAA in this Penn State case because is it worse for parents to live in a house at reduced rent than it is to allow a pedophile maniac to sexually assault kids in your showers? NCAA, that is the question that you need to now answer. Because if you inject yourself into this conversation as you did back in November, you're going to have to now answer up to it somehow. And you already have this precedent set. Now, some people are saying that there's no way that Penn State is going to get the death penalty because it's not a repeat offender. Well, let's just soak that in for a minute. The NCAA would deal harshly with Penn State if it was a repeat offender by allowing minors to be sexually assaulted in its showers. When you say it out loud, does it sound all the more ridiculous that because you have for the second time allowed a bunch of kids to be herded into your showers where they could be brutally sexually assaulted, that now we're going to have to treat you harshly? No, this seems like it's a one-time thing. You let something like this happen, you let it happen repeatedly, you let it happen over at least 15 years, you're probably going to have to answer up for it with the most severe penalty, especially because Joe Paterno was lying about this to try to maintain his recruiting advantage. Just like the argument is USC was trying to obtain an unfair recruiting advantage by allowing agents access to their players where they can then go and do such things as provide parents with reduced rent. Joe Paterno was trying to allow Jerry Sandusky access to his facilities where he could deprive children of innocence and other dear things so he could maintain the appearance of having a football program that was abiding by the rules. So he can go out with his saintly reputation and look parents in the eye and say, send your kids to me, I'm going to take good care of them. Not like these other kids that he was allowing to be ravaged, okay? But allow me this opportunity to do good by your children. He lied so he can maintain that appearance. Or this became about recruiting. This became about football. This became about maintaining an unfair advantage. Unfair because it was completely untrue. Okay? So that is why it is my argument that the NCAA should definitely, if not just interject itself into this conversation, but also do so with ferocity. Because this isn't just about unfair benefits. This isn't about people being supposedly paid in the form of education and room and board and so forth, and experiences traveling around the country playing a sport, and trying to get something above and beyond that, something with a little bit more monetary value that the NCAA, for whatever reason, says they should not do that. Believe me, we'll talk more about this in the future. This is about a football program in an academic institution that allowed horrible, horrible things to happen to kids on its campus, in its facilities, on its watch, all to try to spare the football program and the academic institution embarrassment, which would then almost certainly make doing such things as recruiting blue chippers a little bit more difficult, right? Because Penn State University would have been forever and will now forever be associated with pedophilia, sexual assault, and all sorts of other horrible things. And they earned it. They earned it. And the NCAA, which has been awful high and mighty in so many other conversations, now has earned the right to try to do good by some of it. You know, a lot of people argue this is not a moral issue. Okay, fine, it's not. But you got people who had been lying and perjuring all to benefit the football program, that the NCAA can now say, look, this is about recruiting. This became about recruiting. And because of that, Penn State needs to be dealt the death penalty. If for no other reason that all the other institutions out there realize that you're not bigger than this. The football program is not bigger than the school. And if you're going to ruin lives like this, there will be penalties to face. All right, we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about something a little bit more uplifting. Even if the Diamondbacks are struggling, it is better to talk about than this. You're listening to iTalk 106.7.